15 out of the remaining 78 abducted students of Bethel Baptist High School, Damishi, Kaduna, have been released from captivity. The released students have been handed over to their parents. They were released on Saturday night by bandits. An undisclosed amount of money was paid before the 15 students were freed. The president of Nigerian Baptist Convention, Dr. Israel Akonji, says the remaining students still in captivity are now 63. According to the management of Bethel Baptist High School, the bandits are demanding more money before other students will be released. The school said the figure of students in captivity changed because some of them had escaped from the hands of their captors.
Although the number is smaller than what we were expecting, because we have 78, we had 78 out there. They've given us 15, that means 63 to come. But in everything, God says we should give thanks, and we are giving thanks for what He has done. And we are trusting that the same God who has brought these 15 out is going to help us to receive the other 63. We have great hope in God, and we keep praying and keep asking God for help.
In between our last meeting with you for the release of the 28, I know you have heard that some of them escaped. So that is why you can see the figure is not following whatever we said earlier. The bandit is asking us to give them something. And we want to thank God for well-wishers, relatives, and the Church of God, who actually have been supporting to see that our children are being released.
Although the number is...
Meanwhile, a United Nations UN publication has detailed a secret government program tagged SUHU, designed to pull commanders of terrorist groups including Boko Haram and Islamic State for West Africa province ISWAP out of the forest, rehabilitate them, and provide them with a means of livelihood. The development is coming as intelligence agencies have begun investigation into the recent surrender of 1,200 terrorists and their families in the last 3 weeks. This Operation Sulu, as it's called here, and the release of the students from the bandits.
I actually have to say that it hurts. I actually find it physically painful, this Operation Sulu, that's secret, for good reason, because I think the powers that be are quite aware of the reaction that it will get. My understanding of that Arabic word is that it relates to peace. What kind of peace can you ever strike with bandits? And I think about all the attempts throughout history that have been made to appease people like, I don't know, Hitler by Neville Chamberlain, total disaster. You even, speaking of like a British Prime Minister, Michael Gove, a British minister in Boris Johnson's cabinet, wrote a really great book, Celsius 7-7. And what a disaster the West's appeasement of terrorists turned out to be, which culminated in that attack on London on the 7th of July, hence the title of the book. Appeasement does not work. We saw when they tried to do it with the Houthi rebels in Yemen. It's not going to work in Nigeria either. How can you take people who destroy lives? We saw that horrible footage that we just showed now of the tearful reunion. We're glad those children are home, but we can only begin to imagine the trauma that they endured. The girls were crying. The boys could not cry, as boys are wont to do. They were internalizing their emotions. They just held their heads in their hands. When we see children go through this kind of thing, and then we read about how the people who have tortured them in this way are going to be given means of livelihood. We have reports now of some people on the DSS's payroll getting an allowance for the DSS just to sort of keep them on side and keep them sweet. Another failure in appeasement happened in Nigeria recently with Governor Bello Masari. He knows better than anybody else how peace deals with bandits are just not upheld. So what needs to happen now is that the government needs to take action. We have the Ariana Kakanfo, Gani Adams, saying that the Southwest has paid 3 billion naira to bandits. Can you imagine what the Northerners have paid? And we are continuing to appease these people and treat them with kid gloves and give them money to say thank you for tormenting our people. It's unacceptable.
Dr. Bati?
Well, in simple terms, there are persons who do not like to hear the phrase. What we're dealing with is the failure of the state. The state fails when it is unable to live up to the people's expectations and discharge its responsibilities and obligations under the Constitution. Section 14, subsection 2C of the Nigerian Constitution is very clear that the primary responsibility of government shall be the safety and welfare of the people. And the big challenge that we face today is that of the Nigerian people saying that they don't feel secure and that their welfare is not being taken seriously, given the economic conditions, given the economic statistics that the average Nigerian has had to deal with. Now, the case of students being abducted, over 1,000 students have been abducted in parts of Nigeria since December 2020. In some parts of the north, over 600 schools have had to be shut down. There is a growing population of Nigerian children in parts of the north who do not want to go to school and whose parents are looking for other options out of fear. You know, there's a climate of fear in Nigeria, to quote the title of a book by Professor Wole Soyinka. And the effect, of course, is that the citizen feels insecure. And I think, you know, the major takeaway from the release of these 15 students out of 78, 63 still outstanding, is to remind us of that issue about how citizen security needs to be a major priority. Well, the parents can be congratulated. You know, the Baptist Church can say, well, this is better, that at least we've been able to rescue 15. And as Christians, we must always give thanks to God. But no child, no citizen, nobody should be abducted at all. And as it is, this is a reconfirmation of the fact that abduction, kidnapping in Nigeria has become big business. These abductors of the over 100 students of the Bethel Baptist Secondary School asked for 1 million per child since July 5. And the audacity of their operation is in itself insufferable. They even had the audacity to even ask the parents to send extra clothes to the children. All of this within the context of governance. You know, a government that has not been able to come to the people's rescue. And that nobody should be surprised that Sheikh Ahmed Gumi over the weekend was complaining about you know, an elaborate wedding in a part of the north, and was saying, look, Nigerian leaders are riding private jets up and down to go and attend a wedding, although I don't have a problem with people getting married. But he was complaining about poor leadership, about absent-mindedness, about negligence on the part of the Nigerian leadership, which is a dilemma that we face. Whereas for Operation Sulu, we had before now of Operation Safe Corridor. Under Operation Safe Corridor, I've been talking about the jollification of banditry in Nigeria, whereby clothes, ashwebi, you know, family attires are bought for bandits who are said to be otherwise repentant. And we have seen some of these bandits, in fact, going back to what they know best how to do. And government saying that they will be rehabilitated or they will be reintegrated. The standard argument is that this is in line with UN protocol, rehabilitation, reintegration, reconciliation, and all of that. But well, in Nigeria, we have not seen it working. And you know, how does government balance what they refer to as the kinetic approach and the non-kinetic approach? It looks like now the non-kinetic approach seems to be the main focus. And we have made the point that, look, many of these bandits and their associates, it may not be possible to actually rehabilitate them in real terms. And that in itself can create special problems of its own. So who is doing the analysis? Who is thinking ahead? Who is tracking the data? Who is monitoring these so-called repentant and rehabilitated bandits? Some of whom may show up someday, the way we are carrying on, you know, in positions of responsibility in Nigeria. I hope the day will not come when Nigerians will be keen up to go and vote for a so-called repentant bandit who is, you know, guilty of murder, of criminality, of crimes against the Nigerian state. Nobody who will console the likes of Mrs. Oluwaseun Sakaba, the wife of Lieutenant Colonel I. Sakaba, and she has raised the appropriate question. Her husband was killed by bandits. These bandits don't deserve jollof rice. They don't deserve ashwebi.
I mean, I think the formative word for me has always been the words of Winston Churchill when it comes to appeasement. Churchill would always say, an appeaser is the one that keeps giving the crocodile meat, hoping the crocodile will eat them last. So in the end, if we keep appeasing these people, we're just saying that we'll be doomed in the end. That's just who we are as appeasers. Let's not appease them. Take the fight to them. That's all on News Headline. We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll have the trio of Rotus, Michael, and Aaron to give us updates on Africa, global business, and sports. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotus Adiri is here to give us an African business update. Over to you, Rotus.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to all our viewers. We begin with the Federal Inland Revenue Service, the FIRS, insisting that, if you remember, of course, Rivers State's getting that judgment from a high court that it is supposed to be the one to collect value-added tax and not the federal government. Well, the FIRS said it's received a lot of inquiries since that judgment, and they are telling everyone that they should still they are still allowed to collect VAT from citizens, and that they are constitutionally allowed to do so. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I guess you all, being lawyers, can actually help with this. The FIRS said that it had lodged an appeal, and it's also requested a stay of execution on that decision. However, that hasn't been received yet. And if you read the article in this day newspaper, they said that they have not received that stay of execution yet. The appeal hasn't been acknowledged, but people should still continue as is to make remit VAT payments to the FIRS. So, maybe you else can help with that. Is that how it works? Aren't you supposed to get the injunction first, and then or stay of execution, and then the appeal being lodged and accepted before reverting back to status quo? But anyway, I mean, they've lodged the appeal. It's just a matter of it being acknowledged by the courts, and there's FIRS still insisting that it is the body entitled to collect value-added tax. This still has a way to go. We said that last time when this news broke, and the ramifications are huge. We move from the taxes to conditional cash transfers. The federal government is expected to resume conditional cash transfers today, August the 23rd, in most of the states. This according to Hajia Halima Shehu, who is the national coordinator for the National Cash Transfer Office, which is under the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. She said that the reason why there were delays in the cash transfers being scaled across the country was because due to upgrades. They said they wanted to tweak some of the payment modalities, security concerns, and then key, I think Rufai has mentioned this in the past, digitization. According to Hajia Halima Shehu, only 30% of the conditional cash transfer operations are digitized, only 30%. So that's kind of low. We, of course, when we talk about financial inclusion, when we talk about databases, when we talk about extending financial services to individuals who are unbanked, granted, these are the poorest, or some of the poorest people in the country, so you'd have to have there's the issue of income and so on and so forth before being banked. But still, as far as from a data perspective, the digitization process, only 30%. So they want to tweak all these things. They say not all the states are ready as far as being disbursed, but they will begin today. So that's on conditional cash transfers. We move to electricity and metering. The federal government says they are going to commence the second phase of the NMMP, which is the National Mass Metering Program. This was stated by Mr. Ahmed Zakari, who is an advisor to the President on infrastructure. It was launched December 2020. There was a target of 1 million meters that were to be disbursed. So far, 750,000 have been disbursed. Now, this isn't to be confused with the Meter Asset Program, MAP, which that was debuted about 18 months ago. According to the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Council Commission, NERC, they said that these two programs can run concurrently. So the NMMP, that's, the central bank disbursed about 123 billion to the discos. Those meters are supposed to be provided free of charge to end users. It's free, but then I guess they pay it back through line deductions from the discos going back to the CBN. Now, so that's the NMMP. That's free of charge. Now, if you can't wait to get your meter from the National Mass Metering Program, you can still make an upfront payment for the Meter Asset Program. So again, it kind of sounds a bit confusing, but the federal government says that both programs are supposed to run concurrently. At the end of the day, not enough meters have been pushed out. There's still a gap of about 10 million or so. I believe the MAP has only brought out about 850,000 or so in 18 months, while the NMMP, the National Mass Metering Program, only again 750,000 over the last 8 months or so. So there's still quite a long way to go, whether you use MAP, whether you use National Mass Metering Program. To fuel. This isn't new information, but the PPPRA thought that they would, also hop in here and remind people. The Executive Secretary of the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency, Mr. Abdul Qadir Sadiu, yesterday on Sunday put out a statement saying that the fuel price hinges on labor talks. He essentially said, yes, the Petroleum Industry Act calls for the corporatization, for-profit corporatization of the NNPC. That notwithstanding, fuel prices is going to move until labor talks with government have been concluded. Essentially echoing what the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timi Priscilla, said a week ago. Finally, South Africa. There have been some inflammatory messages on social media in South Africa calling for a nationwide shutdown and protest today. This according to South Africa's National Joint Operational Intelligence Structure. So they're saying that they're on high alert. As you remember, those riots, about 300 people died. $3.3 billion in damage. So South Africa right now is on high. I think we're getting unemployment figures from South Africa tomorrow, which we should, that's another high figure of 35, 36, 37%, maybe 40%. We'll see what those figures are. And that's our update.
I mean, it's sad what is happening in South Africa, but you can have very high unemployment figures and not have riots. It's not done. 40% unemployment figures, you have skirmishes like that. That's why the government should work quickly as regards the unemployment situation in South Africa. And I'm shocked that this cash transfer thing has not been used to include people financially. Somebody would have thought it's a no-brainer that conditional cash transfer is the quickest form for financial inclusion. So all of these monies were given by hand. You were giving people cash in their hands. How can you account for that? You open a register that you write with biro and paper, and you said this person was given 5,000. You could put it on the financial tracker. And you have a lot of fintech companies, but what are we even doing? We are banning the fintech companies. We are saying don't do this, do that, don't do. This is the time that I think before we even launch this conditional cash transfer, the government should sponsor fintech companies or should even set up their own, invest in their own fintech companies to be able to drive this process so we can have a tracker of everybody collecting the money. And you're saying only 30% of the people are digitized, 70% what happens? Anyway, we saw the pictures of how people were collecting money, 10,000 naira, they were sharing money for them, like politicians will do. And you call that conditional cash transfer. It's a joke. It's a joke. You see, we say one thing with one side of our mouth. We're saying another thing with another side of the mouth. It's goodness me. It's like Monty Python's here.
Well, you actually assume that the idea is accountability, Rufai.
The telcos need to be pushing this because if you look at subscriptions, or rather, telcos should be pushing this. But yeah, go right ahead.
Well, the conditional cash transfer is part of the attempt by the federal government to lift 100 million people out of poverty. Hence, a national social register was prepared. It was later updated, focusing on poor and vulnerable households. Now, you recall that during the first phase of the, of the operationalization of this cash transfer initiative by the NSIP, the National Social Investment Program, in collaboration with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, questions were raised. One, about the integrity of the register itself. Second, about whether or not those persons on the register exist. And three, about the geographical distribution of the register with allegations about lopsidedness. We hope that this next phase of the conditional cash transfer scheme that is supposed to begin today, that the persons behind it have taken along lessons that they learned from the last phase, because they need to be reminded that Nigerians will again subject this current exercise to scrutiny. They say they have done digitization of the register and all of that. Yes, they have a register that's available online, but I guess the digitization is in terms of payment connections. But what is important is transparency. What is important is accountability. What is important is Nigerians seeing that indeed this is a this is an honest effort on the part of government. As for VAT, the position of the law, it would seem, following the judgment in the High Court in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, is that constitutionally, states are the ones who are empowered under the Constitution to collect value-added tax, not the federal government. And what that case signposted is a conflict between unitarism and federalism, and how the federal government had, over the years, violated the rights of the states in terms of the collection of tax. It has also helped to address, in one regard, the challenge of multiple taxation. People are overtaxed in this country. You know, federal government collects tax from states and local governments, and then again the states and the local governments collect their own taxes, and so you have this duplication, which deepens invariably the agony of the people. Now, the Federal Inland Revenue Service is saying people should continue to pay the VAT and other taxes to the FIRS. But with regard to the VAT, no, the position of the law is very clear. And that is why some states have since gone ahead to introduce their own VAT laws, because they see it about equity, that is an issue about justice. Now, the FIRS says it has filed an appeal. The question to ask the FIRS is that in this particular case, it was a declaratory judgment that was given, and the court gave specific orders. Will an appeal, translate into a stay of execution? They should ask their lawyers to look in that direction. I think the best thing that they can do is not to talk about status quo ante bellum. No court has given an injunction in that regard. The fact that they have filed an appeal does not automatically become a stay of execution. Have they asked for an injunction? Perhaps. So these are the issues here, and I think that the FRS itself must be interested in the basic jurisprudential issues at the heart of that particular ruling. And nobody should allow himself or herself to be intimidated by a press release by the FIRS.
Well, the FIRS is also interested in their targets, which we discussed last week. And they're just towing the time-honored or dishonored path of flouting court orders. Court orders are orders. They are not requests. But here in Nigeria, we think we can overlook and pick and choose what suits us. And as to the conditional cash transfers, as Rufai was saying, there's any system in this country or elsewhere where you see opacity, rest assured that it's deliberately created and deliberately sustained. But thank you, Rutus. On that note, we'll be moving on to more business updates with Michael Wilson, who's joining us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. The meeting Jackson Hole Symposium, which is held on Thursday and Friday, a virtual meeting, of course, because of COVID, and not necessarily national, bring central financial figures together in the United States. I think most people are looking at that sort of indication as to whether the Fed may or may not be thinking about tightening and when. We know it is, sort of, but the question of when is still there. As far as Asia-Pacific stocks are concerned, rose very, very slightly. Hang Seng back after falling into that bear market last week. The heavy losses really on the Hang Seng, all about the regulatory uncertainty clouding the outlook for Chinese technology companies. Mainland Chinese stocks up today. The Nikkei up very, very slightly. South Korean's Kospi. It's worth looking at this, actually. Shares of LG Chem. This is the one that, because GM is recalling its car, which is called the Chevrolet Bolt EV. That's an electrical car, after finding manufacturing defects in certain of the batteries, which LG, which is the international manufacturer, they've actually found. The Australian Prime Minister has said that the COVID complete lockdown in Australia is sustainable. We can actually contrast that with what's happening in New Zealand, similar kind of thing there. Some states are taking matters into their own hands and saying we're not going to stop travelling interstate in Australia. Many people are very unhappy about it, businesses too, certainly tourism industry certainly is, but it's until the vaccination coverage reaches 8%. So we go back to Afghanistan as we must, and China is noted as having increased its ties with the Taliban. The relationship between China, though, is pretty tricky because of the the Chinese extremism amongst Muslims in Xinjiang. However, authorities may be wanting to protect them themselves against terrorism. The militant group Taliban has said, as I told you on Friday, it is looking forward to China's participation in the reconstruction and development of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the UK, Boris Johnson is calling a G7 meeting to talk about ways of reaching out to the Taliban, maybe through Russia. China that China and Russia are crucial to limiting the chaos that's running through the country right now. And Joe Biden in the United States has nominated a former US ambassador to NATO, Nicholas Burns, to be his ambassador to China. I say there's nothing directly to do with geopolitical importance, obviously. So therefore, stock futures, as far as the US is concerned, up about 140 points. It was a losing week last week, as I told you. As I said, looking forward to the Jackson Hole Symposium and to find out whether and when the Fed is going to be dialing back its £120 billion a month bond buying program. Bitcoin is up to 50,000, reaching more than a 3-month high, $50,000 a day. But it sold off heavily in June, so it's still very volatile. However, if you're in it, you're in it. As far as cryptos are concerned, in the UK, PayPal is launching its cryptocurrency service. It's amongst many firms taking this leap into cryptocurrencies. This one is with the complete cooperation, as I understand it, of the British authorities, the regulatory authorities. Staying with the UK, consumers still the cash, although we got those disappointing retail sales on Friday, they don't actually, as I said to you then, give a complete picture of how people are spending the money. They don't include spending in payment places, and that's still relatively high. COVID tests, there are lots of them around. We still have to have private COVID tests if we've been to various countries abroad. In this country, there's more than 30 private ones. Prices and efficacy of them actually vary considerably. At last, the government's going to clamp down on what has grown up within the system. Same thing will happen in Nigeria, I'm sure, when it comes to you, that people are taking advantage of people like me having to have private tests before we can actually be registered and go abroad again, or indeed come out of hibernation or isolation. And there is a crisis in this country about HGV drivers, lorry drivers. Between whomever you've listened to, there are 10,000, 60,000 fewer than there ought to be. The problem is the training is quite complicated, takes about 9 months, but clearly it's getting in the way of supply chains. Now, briefly and finally, commodities. Oil, I'm going to throw in copper and iron ore to this as well, because those commodities are actually, the volatility is trending higher, and that sort of uncertainty is pressing prices down. All the fears about growth as well. You wouldn't really be holding physical amounts of gold unless you have be investing in gold miners. Well, as the gold price has fallen, gold miners have actually lost 20%. You remember the gold was $2,000 this time last year. It's still into its high ground. It's holding round about $1,800. Invested in gold miners, you'll find that you're 5%. Not saying it's not a good idea. It might be in future, but not right now. That's your global view.
All right, Michael, thank you so much. So the Jackson on Hold meeting coming up today is going to take a cursory look at 21 months since the pandemic started, the economy of the world. And I'd like to ask you, how's it fared for you? And secondly, will be about what is happening to UK companies. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is taking a second look at that Cobhams deal. I think he stopped it from Ultra. Why is it that UK companies are selling for cheap at this point in time? And these are strategic companies, as it were. Can they get internal investment?
Okay, Jackson Hole, just to be absolutely clear, is not tomorrow. Thursday and Friday it is actually, and that's what the whole of the week is actually looking towards. Sorry to correct you, but it's important that we actually notice that. What will we get from there? We may get some kind of indication about what the Fed's doing. We may not. I don't know. But certainly that's the big one as far as people are actually getting. And what we'll hear from then is the regional Fed governors as well, rather than just the central, just from Jerome Powell, but also the people who've been voicing dissent over it. And I think the markets will get a flavour really of what's actually happening there. As far as the UK and strategic things are concerned, Yes, I mean, look, companies like Morrison's, for example, there's the supermarket thing, that fight for that's still on. It's not a strategic company particularly, but it does illustrate the other point you were making about companies looking relatively cheap to overseas investors, and well-run companies as well, it has to be said, looking quite cheap, like Morrison's is. Morrison's got its own fully funded pension scheme, its own supply chains, its own farm, so it's looking quite good. As far as security companies are concerned, like Ultra, for example, which you referenced just then, we have to wait to see. I think there'll be a lot of opposition to companies like that going abroad. I think that more and more around the world, the global economy is still global, but the effects of being global are not as pronounced as they were pre-pandemic. And certainly most countries now closing their doors on secure assets for obvious reasons.
Well, let's talk about China. You mentioned China, saying that China warming up to the Taliban is tricky. Is this a pragmatic move on the part of China? And isn't it also ironic? Maybe China is afraid of extremism, across the border. But the same China that is warming up, costing up to the Taliban will not allow the Muslim, what's that pronunciation? Uyghurs. Yes, the Uyghurs, in Xinjiang, in the northern part of the country. And then again, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is summoning an online meeting of the G7 in his capacity as chairman. He wants sanctions against the Taliban in Afghanistan. He also wants to put pressure on President Joe Biden to extend the deadline for U.S. troops withdrawal from Afghanistan, from the Kabul airport. What should we expect? Do you think that the Americans will cooperate? And when the matter eventually goes to the UN Security Council, would China and Russia play ball in trying to impose sanctions on the Taliban?
All those questions are very big ones, aren't they, really? I mean, I think the fact is, until you actually realise that geopolitics is not black and white and there are grey areas, you may have to be siding up with people that you might not want to. I find it unbelievable that we might be depending upon Russia and China to act as intermediaries as far as the Taliban is concerned. Who would have thought of that even just 2 weeks ago? Nobody, of course, but things move on. And the Taliban wants betting, so we know that most of the assets that they can't get their hands on are abroad, number one. The IMF is not going to give them any money until it's recognised and find out exactly what they want to do. So that's number two. So that they're taken over, but their isolation is relatively complete at the moment. So that is the way forward for diplomacy. It takes brave people to actually say, okay, what we've got to do is get the Taliban, because over this. We're not really interested in any riches that Afghanistan actually has. Come on to the Chinese in a moment, because they're there for the precious metal. They're there to lend the money in the same way that they've done through Africa. And would you want to be tying your debt down to Chinese creditors? You probably wouldn't. I don't know. You know what the experience in Africa is. So we're going to see a lot of that in Afghanistan. All these things are right up in the air at the moment. What will happen? I don't think there'll be sanctions straight away, because there's nothing to. What is there to sanction? There is no. I mean, you can place holding orders on the assets they have abroad, but with Afghanistan, a lot of talk about narcotics and so on. It's not a huge amount of their unofficial GDP, 40%, but much more Afghan authorities, or whatever the Taliban will call themselves, are the customs duties that it costs to take cigarettes across the territory. That's the kind of game that's being played at the moment. But until the Taliban are brought to the negotiating table, it has to be with Russia, then so be it. These are big days for international politics. These are the sort of issues that you actually have to address. Very unpalatable and difficult they are.
Well, regarding China and Taliban, politics has always made strange bedfellows. But I'm interested in these the COVID test clampdown. Finally, well, better late than never, with these cowboys fleecing the traveling public and just the phantom 20-pound test that nobody has ever taken. What took so long? Do you think that this is just one of those other balls that Matt Hancock dropped, and it's because we now have a new health secretary in England, Sajid Javid, that he's finally taken the relatively simple action of just striking off a whole bunch of firms that don't exist from the websites?
I don't know the answer to that. All I can do having gone through all that, because we came back from France and so on, and had to get these ridiculous tests that were very expensive, and I assume that they're okay. How would I know? I'm not an epidemiologist. I put my trust in vaccines from the NHS. I certainly have no idea. I've never heard of the company that I went to, and nor had a lot of people. When I went actually to put my sample in the bin where I was supposed to put it, obviously we were getting calls from the NHS authorities saying, why aren't you at home? Well, I'm going to put my sample in the bin. The bin was piled high. Somebody put a notice on it saying this is not a rubbish bin. I mean, it was utterly crazy. So what's happened is, I think a lot of journalists have got onto this and put big stories about this into. I've got no idea about Hancock. I don't know whether he's done this or not, the case may be, but it's a good move for the health secretary. But it is, of course, it's too late. It's much too late now, because we're getting through this. I mean, the next big thing is when we get in this country, is when we get our third vaccines, our booster vaccine, and our flu one towards the end of the year. So yes, of course, it's too late, but it's a salary for the rest of the world, isn't it? That if you start allowing private companies into this, you're going to get cowboys. Of course you are.
All right, I mean, many issues. Thank you so much for your time, Michael. And on days like this, I'm tempted to quote Tupac by saying that's just the way things will never be the same when you look at everything happening in the world. But thank you so much for your time. All right.